Hi one and all, are we ready for some horror stories? These 3 stories are all set in my country, good old Scotland. Let's chill and enjoy these stories. Trent had eagerly anticipated his trip to Scotland, imagining the serene beauty of the countryside would provide the perfect inspiration for his next novel. However, as he arrived in the small town of Bryn Mawr, he was immediately struck by a sense of unease. The locals gave him sideways glances as he walked through the streets, their expressions a mix of suspicion and fear, as if they knew something he didn't. The howls of wolves that could be heard in the distance only added to his apprehension. As Trent settled into a pub for a drink, he overheard whispers of creatures from ancient legends. They spoke of vampires, beings that could live for centuries and feed on the blood and energy of humans. Trent tried to shake it off as mere superstition, but the unsettling feeling in his gut refused to go away. As the days passed, Trent began to notice more ominous signs. The town's main square was adorned with ancient symbols that seemed to be wards against something unspeakable. In the forests at night, he heard noises that were certainly not made by any animal he knew of. He met a group of tourists who had arrived in the town, eager to explore the sights, but they disappeared without a trace. The locals seemed unfazed by this and refused to speak about it, only casting wary glances at Trent whenever he asked questions. It wasn't until Trent himself was taken that he realized the full horror of what was happening in Bryn Mawr. He awoke in a cold stone room, the symbols on the walls and the flickering candles casting eerie shadows across the room. The vampires surrounded him, their red eyes glowing in the darkness as they licked their lips hungrily. Trent's heart pounded as he realized he was about to become their next meal. He fought with all his might, trying to remember everything he had ever read or written about vampires. But the creatures were too strong, and as their fangs sank into his skin, he knew he was doomed. But the vampires did not kill him. Instead, they took him to a hidden chamber deep in the forest, where they revealed the true nature of their existence. The vampires had lived in Bryn Mawr for centuries, hidden from the rest of the world, using their powers to control the town's inhabitants and ensure their own survival. They explained that Trent had been chosen as a sacrifice, a necessary offering to maintain their control over the town. And as they prepared to feed on him again, Trent realized that he would never escape the clutches of Bryn Mawr and its hidden secrets. The vampires had already taken too much from him, his blood, his energy, his life. Trent knew that he was just one more victim in a long line of sacrifices, destined to remain trapped in the darkness of the Scottish village forevermore. The Scottish Highlands have always been a favorite destination for tourists from all over the world, including me, Vincent, from France. The vast stretches of greenery, the rugged landscape, and the serene beauty of the place were what I was looking for when I decided to take a break from my hectic life. It was a crisp autumn evening, the sky was a deep shade of blue, and the sun had just set behind the hills, leaving behind an eerie silence. I was walking along a winding road, admiring the jagged rocks that dot the landscape, when I realized that I had wandered off the main path. The rolling grassy landscape that had seemed so charming just moments ago now appeared ominous in the fading light. I tried to retrace my steps, but it was too late. The path back was gone, swallowed by the increasing darkness. I could feel my heartbeat increasing as I trudged through the wilderness, the sounds of nighttime animals signaling a primal fear inside me. At one point I stumbled upon a small cottage, and it appeared deserted. I called out, but there was only silence. As I continued on, I began to hear a faint sound in the distance. It was difficult to make out, but it sounded like a group of people chanting in unison. The chanting grew louder with every passing moment, and I realized that I had unknowingly wandered into a pagan ritual. By this time, I was shaking with horror, and my legs felt too heavy to move. The chanting was coming closer and closer until I could see the flickering outlines of the mysterious figures carrying torches. Before I could react, they had surrounded me, their chanting growing louder as they closed in. Their faces were hidden behind strange, savage masks, and their movements were frenzied and wild. I stood frozen in place as they began to dance around me, their bodies moving to the beat of the eerie music. As the night wore on, the chanting and dancing intensified, and clouds of smoke from the torches made it difficult to see or breathe. In the midst of the chaos, I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned around to see one of the masked figures staring back at me. I felt a wave of terror wash over me as I realized that I was trapped in the clutches of something primal and ancient. The masked figure led me towards the center of the ritual, where a large bonfire burned brightly. The heat of the flames was intense, and I could feel the sweat dripping down my forehead. The chanting continued to fill the air, and I noticed that some of the figures had begun to speak in a language that was completely unfamiliar to me. Suddenly, the chanting stopped, and all eyes turned towards a figure that had emerged from the shadows. It was a tall, imposing figure with a headdress made of antlers. I could feel my heart racing as he approached me, his eyes fixed on mine. He spoke in a deep, guttural voice, and I could barely make out his words. He seemed to be asking me something, but I had no idea what he wanted. The masked figures around me grew more frenzied, and I could feel their energy building to a crescendo. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, a bolt of lightning split the sky, illuminating the entire area in a bright white light. The figure in front of me let out a wild cry, and the masked figures around me began to dance even more wildly. The heat of the fire intensified, and I felt like I was about to pass out. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the ritual ended. The figures around me dispersed, and I was left standing there, alone in the darkness. I stumbled through the wilderness, my heart pounding in my chest, until I finally came across a main road. I never spoke of that night to anyone, and I still have nightmares about it to this day. The Scottish Highlands may be beautiful, but they are also full of secrets and ancient mysteries that are best left undisturbed.
I hope you enjoy the content I upload. If you like what I'm doing, why not think about clicking on the subscribe button to keep up to date on my uploads. Thank you all for the great support.
I had always been drawn to the macabre and the mysterious, so when I decided to take a vacation to Scotland, I knew that visiting the haunted underground vaults in Edinburgh was a must. As a native of New York, I had seen my fair share of haunted houses and spooky stories, but nothing could have prepared me for what I would encounter in the depths of those eerie tunnels. I joined a group of tourists that promised to take us on a tour of the most haunted vaults in Edinburgh. The guide was an elderly Scottish man with a mop of grey hair and a thick accent. He warned us that the vaults were not for the faint of heart and that we should be careful not to stray from the group. Descending into the vaults was like entering a different world. The air was musty, and the walls were damp and covered in moss. The darkness was thick, and the only light came from the flashlights our guide had provided us. The guide showed us around, telling stories of murders, witchcraft, and other supernatural happenings that had taken place in the vaults. As we walked through the eerie tunnels, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I turned around, but no one was there. Suddenly the guide stopped and shone his flashlight on a small room off to the side of the tunnel. "This room is particularly active," he said. "People have reported seeing figures and hearing voices in here." We all craned our necks to peer into the dark room. At first, it seemed perfectly ordinary, just an empty room with a dirt floor. But then, as we looked closer, we noticed something strange. The dirt on the floor had been disturbed, and something was moving beneath the surface. Suddenly, the dirt erupted in a geyser of dust and grime, and a skeletal hand shot up from the hole. It was followed by another hand, and then a head. The figure rose slowly from the hole, and we could see that it was a ghostly figure, a woman dressed in ragged clothes with matted hair. She reached out a bony hand towards us, moaning a low, mournful sound. We all screamed in terror and ran in different directions, trying to get away from the ghostly figure. I stumbled and fell, and when I looked up, I found myself alone in the darkness. I called out to the group, but there was no answer. I felt cold fingers brush my neck, and I knew that I was not alone. The ghostly figure had followed me. I tried to run, but my legs felt heavy as if they were made of lead. The darkness seemed to close in around me, and I could hear the ghostly figure's moans echoing in my ears. I was trapped, and I knew that I was going to die. Suddenly, a bright light flooded the tunnel, and the ghostly figure recoiled in horror. It let out an anguished wail and then disappeared into thin air. I looked up and saw the guide standing in the tunnel entrance with a lantern in his hand. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gruff with concern. I stumbled towards him, my legs shaking beneath me. "What was that?" I gasped. "That," he said, "was the ghost of a poor woman who was locked up in these vaults many years ago. Her spirit is trapped here, forever tormented by the pain and suffering she endured in life." I smiled, trying not to show everyone the fear I had felt inside me. The group went ahead of me as I tried to compose myself, trying to brush off the terror I had felt. Suddenly, I heard a low growling noise. I froze in terror, my heart racing. The growling grew louder, and I realized it was coming from the shadows ahead of me. I tried to back away, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The growling turned into a snarl, and a pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness. I could see the outline of a large, shadowy shape, and I knew it was some kind of animal. It took a step forward, and I saw the glint of sharp teeth in its mouth. I turned and ran, my legs pumping as fast as they could go. I could hear the animal behind me, its breath hot on my heels. I could feel its claws scrabbling at my back, tearing at my clothes. I screamed, knowing that I was going to die. Just when I thought it was all over, I saw a glimmer of light ahead. I ran towards it, praying that it was a way out. As I got closer, I saw that it was the group. They had been waiting for me, and when they saw me running towards them, they shone their flashlights in my direction. "Are you okay?" one of them asked, concern etched on their face. I nodded, gasping for breath. "There was something down there," I said. "Something that chased me." The guide stepped forward, his face grim. "That's not the first time we've encountered something like that down here," he said. "There are rumors of creatures that live in the vaults. Some say they're rats, but others claim they're something else entirely." I shuddered, thinking of the glowing eyes and sharp teeth. "We need to get out of here," I said. The guide nodded, and we began to make our way back to the entrance. As we walked, I could hear the sound of footsteps behind us. I turned around, but there was no one there. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. We finally reached the entrance, and I breathed a sigh of relief. But as we stepped outside, I realized something was wrong. The sky had turned dark, and there was a strange, electric feeling in the air. The streetlights were flickering, casting eerie shadows on the cobblestones. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling. The guide looked up at the sky. "I don't know," he said. "But something's not right." As we walked back to our hotel, the feeling of unease grew stronger. The streets were empty, and there was no sound except for our footsteps. It was as if the entire city had been swallowed up by the darkness. When we finally reached our hotel, I collapsed on the bed, exhausted and scared. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. The shadows seemed to move, and I could hear whispers on the wind. I tried to sleep, but my dreams were filled with images of ghosts, monsters, and dark, twisting tunnels. I woke up screaming, sweat pouring down my face. The next morning, we decided to explore the city during the day. We visited the castle, walked down the Royal Mile, and took a tour of the Scottish Parliament. But no matter where we went, I couldn't stop thinking about what happened down in the vaults. This will live with me forever.